it comes under what's called now acquisitive crime, so things like theft from and of motor vehicles, burglary. The majority of those cases have been investigated by uniform response officers, so frontline police officers who are also managing immediate response calls, so the blue light type calls. So they've got these probably 15 to 20 investigations on their books, while they're also dealing with urgent calls. So the time they can dedicate to these calls is limited. And also they've got to factor in then shift work. So it might be early turn one day, night duty the next. Now you can't do much investigation of a burglary on night duty. So you're limited to the amount of days you've got and the time you've got to work. So no surprise at all that we've gone away from the basics of policing, a police officer attending a crime, providing some crime prevention advice to the victim and some time to them, and then investigating a crime properly.
And was it the case that burglaries and you know, big car theft used to be dealt with CID, that it was the detectives who were trying to find out, you know, how they'd gained entry, what was going on and so on, particularly, I suppose, if there's a spate in one area?
Well, that sounds like an old, as I am an old retired police officer, but when I was reporting crimes, burglaries used to be investigated by either a burglary squad or by almost like a potential or apprentice detective. So it was like you're grounded into the CID. So you'd have dedicated units that would deal with burglaries and robberies. Uniform used to deal with a majority of vehicle crime, but the CID, the detectives, would deal with things like burglary and robbery. Now, there's a national shortage of detectives, as there is a shortage of police officers. So the whole thing is no surprise at all that we're in this situation.
And is, you know, you've talked about postcode lottery. One assumes that this is particularly prevalent in metropolitan areas where there's obviously, you know, density of housing, it's easy to get into flats, and it's opportunist burglary a lot of the time.
Very much so. Things like London, Greater Manchester, West Midlands, those bigger areas, the bigger urban areas where there's great opportunities. But again, you couple into that with greater demand on police time and resources as well. So the whole thing is no surprise at all. We're at this stage. The recommendations from HMIC are good. Go back to basics. Go back to almost triaging the call when it first comes in with a call handler, and then trying, if you can, to send an officer down to investigate it. You need to go down and look at these things, and if you can, give the victim some time. Most people just want some time from an officer. They understand the pressures of the job, but they just want to see a police officer, be listened to for a period of time, and if you're honest with them, and feel safe.
How much do you think public perception perhaps hinders you in terms of police response? Do you find that there are people who are just simply not reporting crime because they realise it's going to take too long, or an officer won't be able to do much about it?
Had that loads of time. People say to me, didn't bother reporting it. I always used to say to people, even if you go in with your eyes open, with the almost like the knowledge that maybe you're not going to get your property back, but the fact the police know these offences are taking place is the first key. If they know offences are taking place in an area, they may have an idea of who's committed them. Quite often we do. And they can then direct resources and other tactics into able to try and detect them.
What's your reaction to the idea we heard from Liz Truss about league tables in terms of performance on the... Oh, he's shaking the head already as we got the answer. Or indeed the whole issue of politics being involved in policing.
Not again, no. Double no.
But apart from that, OK.
Once you start setting targets, and the reason, again, we're in this situation is because there are other targets like meeting charter times. So maybe not arresting people as often as you do, so you can just get to the calls on time.
Get the paperwork.
So once you put a league table in place or set a target, whatever it is, to meet a certain thing by a certain time, you tend to prioritise that over other calls.
Graham, I mean, look at the front pages of all the newspapers. We're talking about an energy crisis, a cost of living crisis. Are we going to see crime increase?
Yeah, definitely.
In the next few months?
Based on my knowledge and experience, that whenever there's an issue with finances, with household income, that drives crime up, because people then go out to commit crime to basically get money in and feed their families. So I would imagine you'll see crime increasing. Policing does need to get back to basics, though, and just looking at calls coming in, giving victims some time and prioritising. On response teams now, I think across the country, the average length of service is about 5 years or under, or even less than that, because you'll hear soundbites from politicians. We're recruiting 20,000 officers. I think we're at 13,000 so far.
Well, I was going to ask him, your book, How to Be a Police Officer, you might have a second volume. Who would want to be a police officer at the moment? Is that the problem?
Yeah, it is. It is. Recruitment and retention is a big problem. You're losing significant levels of experience, and they're experienced detectives, experienced police officers on the front line who can get to a crime, work out very quickly if there's any possible leads or investigations.
And you're losing all that experience.
You're losing all that, and no disrespect, you're replacing it with brand new people. It's almost like having a brand new presenter come on, and you have to learn your trade, you have to learn your profession.
Yeah, awful thing to have a new presenter in, isn't it? Start from scratch.
He didn't know who was coming in with this morning. Graham, how many people do we need on the ground? I mean, if we're talking numbers, how many more police officers are we going to need? And
the 20,000 they want to recruit takes us back to levels in 2010, and demand on policing has increased significantly since then. That doesn't even take into account the 20,000 support staff that policing lost. So that gives you a ballpark figure. So what, 20,000 new inexperienced officers, because it takes you a good few years to learn your trade, to learn actually the job. So significantly more, and they're not even close to the 20,000 yet.
Yeah,
and they're now
in hundreds at the moment per month rather than the thousands that you need.
Yeah, but the difficulty they've got is if they don't reach those figures, I think police forces are going to be fined for not reaching them. So they're now literally looking at recruiting anybody they can just to meet their targets. Again, we're back to targets, and they will do anything to meet a target.
Go back to work.